In the remote heart of the Missouri Ozarks, a chilling legend took root. A story whispered through generations about two sisters whose beauty masked something far darker. They weren't ordinary women. They were known for luring men into their world only for those men to vanish without a trace. What really happened deep within those woods? And why does the name of the Wild Sisters still send shivers down the spine of locals today? Tonight, we uncover the horrible story of the Wild Sisters of the Missouri Ozarks who attracted men and did unspeakable things. Deep within the tangled wilderness of the Missouri Ozarks, where the trees seemed to whisper secrets of the past, and the mist rolls in thick from the hollows, two sisters lived in a cabin that few dared to approach. They were known only as the Wild Sisters, a name that locals gave them not out of affection, but out of fear and fascination. No family, no known history, no trace of where they had come from. Yet they carried themselves with a strange haunting grace that seemed to draw attention wherever they went. Men from nearby towns were captivated by their beauty, their mysterious charm, and their hypnotic voices that could turn suspicion into desire within moments. They would appear at markets or church gatherings once in a blue moon, always dressed in dark weathered clothes, their eyes glinting with a mixture of sorrow and something far more dangerous. Whispers spread quickly among the townsfolk that those who visited the sisters' cabin often never returned. At first the stories were dismissed as local gossip, the kind of tale people tell to entertain themselves in isolated mountain communities. But as more men began to vanish without explanation, the rumors grew darker. Locals spoke of strange lights seen flickering from the sisters' cabin at night, and of screams carried on the wind across the hollers. The sisters seemed to know the forest better than anyone else, able to move silently through the undergrowth as if the wilderness itself obeyed their will. Hunters claimed to find animal bones arranged in strange patterns near the creek that ran behind their property, and children were warned never to wander too close to their land. Despite the growing fear surrounding them, the sisters remained calm, distant, and eerily composed whenever confronted. Their charm never faded. If anything, it seemed to grow stronger with each disappearance, as if something about the fear of others only made them more alluring. Some said they practiced old mountain witchcraft, using herbs, charms, and rituals to bend men's minds and souls. Others believed they had made some dark pact, long ago, trading innocence for power. But no one ever dared to go too deep into those woods to find the truth. Those who did, never returned to tell what they saw. Travelers passing through the Ozarks would sometimes stop at the nearest town for supplies, and hear the warnings. But many ignored them, curious about the rumors of two beautiful women, living alone in the forest. It was said the sisters invited certain men in, offering them food, warmth, and comfort, only for those men to vanish into the night. When search parties were finally organized, they found traces of torn clothing, boot prints leading toward the cabin, and drag marks that disappeared into the mud near the creek. No bodies were ever found, only the overwhelming silence of the woods, and the faint scent of smoke drifting from the sisters' chimney, as if nothing had ever happened. The Wild Sisters of the Ozarks became a living nightmare, a story of beauty, mystery, and horror that refused to fade from the minds of those who lived close enough to remember. As the disappearances continued to mount, the nearby towns of the Missouri Ozarks began to fall into a state of quiet panic. Though few dared to speak openly about what they suspected, the locals knew where the missing men had last been seen, and their trails always led toward the secluded cabin deep within the forest, hidden behind thick layers of oak and pine that shielded it from sight. It was said that the sisters' home was unlike any other in the area. Surrounded by hand-carved symbols etched into the trees and animal skulls hanging from branches like macabre guardians. Those who ventured close enough claimed the air grew colder, heavier, and filled with an unnatural stillness, as though the forest itself held its breath around that place. No one could understand why the sisters remained untouched by fear. Living in isolation, without contact, without help, and without explanation, people began to remember small, unsettling details they had overlooked before. Farmers recalled seeing the sisters late at night, walking barefoot through the fields under a full moon, their long hair illuminated by the silver light, moving in a trance-like rhythm, as if performing a ritual only they understood. Others said they heard singing from the woods, soft, beautiful, and sad, yet carrying a tone that made the animals restless, and the dogs howl. There was something hypnotic about their presence, as though they were both human and something otherworldly. Some believed they could control the minds of those who looked too long into their eyes. The men who went missing were often last seen enchanted, insisting that the sisters were misunderstood, that they were kind and gentle souls who had simply been wronged by gossip. None of them ever lived to change their minds. It wasn't long before search parties were organized, though few had the courage to lead them. The first group returned after only a few hours, pale and trembling, saying they had heard strange noises. Low humming, whispering voices, and the snapping of branches, as though something unseen was circling them. They swore they had seen shadowy figures moving just beyond the lantern light, too fast to be human. The second group never came back at all. Days later, someone found their horses grazing near the edge of the woods. But the men were gone, their weapons and supplies scattered as if they had fled in terror. From that moment on, no one else volunteered to go. The sheriff, already weary from the rumors and frightened of what he might find, declared the area forbidden, advising people to leave the sisters alone. But the fear didn't end there. The families of the missing never stopped grieving, and their sorrow fueled the legend that would spread for generations. The sisters' names were spoken only in whispers, and their cabin became a symbol of dread, a place that parents used to scare their children into obedience. The locals said that if you stood too close to the edge of the woods after dark, you could still see flickers of light and hear faint laughter carried through the trees. The echo of the men who vanished and the women who lured them into the darkness forever. The beauty of the wild sisters was the kind that unsettled the soul, not the kind that offered warmth or kindness. Their charm carried a weight of danger, something dark that drew men in even when every instinct screamed to stay away. It was said that their eyes held a strange shimmer, a flicker that could shift from affection to cruelty in a heartbeat. Those who met them described a voice so soft and melodic that it could quiet fear, convincing even the most cautious man to step closer. Many believe the sisters used their beauty as a weapon, a tool to ensnare anyone foolish enough to underestimate them. They seemed to know exactly what to say, exactly when to smile, and exactly how to make a man feel like he had found something rare and forbidden. Once that feeling took hold, it was impossible to escape. The sisters had mastered the art of manipulation, using innocence as a disguise and charm as a trap. Men who came near their cabin often spoke afterward of the intoxicating scent of herbs and smoke that hung in the air, of candles burning in windows long past midnight, and of faint music that seemed to come from nowhere. Some said they were invited inside, welcomed with food and drink, treated like old friends. But those encounters never ended the same way. Sometimes the men disappeared that very night. Other times they would return to town days later, pale, trembling, and unable to speak of what had happened, as though some unseen terror had hollowed them out from the inside. The few who managed to tell their stories described flashes of strange rituals, whispers in languages they did not recognize, and eyes watching from the darkness, unblinking and cold. They said the sisters' laughter lingered in their ears long after they left, echoing in their dreams until they could no longer bear it. There were rumors that the sisters were not merely killers, but collectors, taking something from each man they lured, something beyond life itself. Old folk tales from the Ozarks spoke of witches who could capture souls through seduction, binding their victims in eternal servitude. The evidence, though scarce, seemed to point towards something like that. Deep in the woods, hunters found small trinkets, rings, pocket watches, and lockets, half buried near the creek that ran behind the cabin. Inside some of those trinkets were the initials of men who had gone missing years before. No one knew how they ended up there, or what became of the bodies, but the implication was chilling. The sisters had turned their beauty into a curse, using the power of desire to ensnare their victims, turning love into a slow, deliberate act of destruction. As time went on, their reputation grew far beyond the Ozarks. Travelers began to avoid that stretch of road altogether, and even the bravest of men refused to enter the forest after sunset. The sisters had become a living legend, the embodiment of temptation and death woven into one. Yet no one could deny their allure, the way their presence stirred curiosity, even in those who feared them most. It was as if they understood human weakness better than anyone else, using it not for survival, but for something far more sinister, something that no one could ever fully explain. Years after the sisters' disappearance, a group of loggers stumbled upon the ruins of their old cabin deep in the Missouri Ozarks. What they found would confirm every whisper that had haunted the nearby towns for decades. The cabin had long since decayed, its roof caved in, the walls blackened by fire, but the air still carried a heaviness, a sense that something terrible had once lived there. Beneath the ashes, they uncovered bones, human bones, arranged in strange, deliberate patterns, as though part of some ritual that had been interrupted. Nearby, they found small jars sealed with wax, each containing locks of hair, teeth, and objects belonging to men who had gone missing years before. The discovery reignited the horror that had once consumed the towns. And soon, investigators and journalists poured in, desperate to uncover the truth behind the legend of the Wild Sisters of the Ozarks. As they dug deeper, they found evidence that the sisters' home had been more than just a place of isolation. Old tools, handmade dolls with missing eyes and carved symbols on the walls, suggested that the sisters had practiced rituals rooted in old mountain folklore. Spells said to bind spirits, preserve beauty, and invoke protection from the living. Locals who visited the site after hearing of the discovery claimed to feel a strange energy in the air, a force that made the skin crawl and the stomach tighten. Even the animals avoided the area, the forest unnaturally silent around the burned remains of the cabin. The investigators noted that some of the bones found didn't belong to men at all, but to animals, wolves, deer, and even birds. Each one mutilated in the same fashion, placed in circles as though part of an offering. Despite the growing fascination, there were still those who insisted that what happened there could not be explained by human hands alone. They believed the sisters had been guided by something darker, something that had granted them power at a terrible cost. Old letters and journal scraps found in a metal box near the cabin hinted at their descent into madness, their words growing increasingly frantic, filled with references to voices in the woods and shadows that followed them home. One passage described a night when the forest itself seemed alive, whispering promises of eternal youth and vengeance. It was after that night, according to the writing, that the sisters began to change, more secretive, more violent. Their eyes filled with something that was no longer human. When authorities attempted to remove the remains from the site, strange accidents began to occur. Equipment failed. Fires started without warning, and several workers claimed to see figures in the fog, watching from the treeing. Some even refused to return, saying that the land didn't want to be disturbed. Eventually, the case was closed, and the site was abandoned once more, left to the creeping vines and the silence of the forest. Those who ventured too close afterwards spoke of a sense of being watched, of whispers that rose and fell with the wind, and of faint laughter that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, a haunting reminder of the sisters who had once ruled the Ozark woods with beauty, terror, and secrets too dark to name. Even though decades had passed since the last confirmed sighting of the Wild Sisters, the legend refused to die. It seemed as though the forest itself preserved their memory, carrying their story through the generations like an unbroken curse. Locals said that their spirits never left the Ozarks, that they still roamed the same woods they once used as their hunting ground, their laughter echoing faintly on moonless nights. Travelers reported strange occurrences near the area where the cabin once stood. Lantern lights flickering deep among the trees, disembodied whispers that seemed to call their names, and sudden drops in temperature that left breath visible even in the summer heat. Some who camped too close to the site claimed they woke to find symbols drawn in the dirt around their tents. Perfectly formed circles that hadn't been there the night before. The few who dared to investigate further often left in silence, their eyes hollow, refusing to speak about what they had seen or heard. The legend of the sisters became so deeply rooted in the culture of the Ozarks, that even those who didn't believe in ghosts, refused to step near their territory after dark. Parents passed down the story to their children as a warning against temptation, greed, and curiosity. The sisters became symbols of the hidden darkness within beauty, of the dangers that lurk behind charm and desire. Some versions of the tale softened over time, painting them as victims of betrayal, women who had been wronged and turned to vengeance out of heartbreak. Others remained brutally consistent, claiming they were born of evil itself, destined to bring ruin to any man who crossed their path. In every telling, however, one truth remained. The sisters' power came not from strength, but from allure. From the way they could twist the hearts of men, until fear became fascination, and fascination turned to death. Researchers and folklore experts who studied the case over the years collected interviews, photographs, and evidence that blurred the line between fact and fiction. They found newspaper clippings from the late 1800s mentioning missing men, strange rituals, and reports of two unidentified women sighted in the hills. There were also photographs, faded and grainy, of women standing near the ruins of a cabin, their faces turned away from the camera as if unwilling to be seen. Some believe these were staged. Others swore they were genuine. A few old residents who had lived their entire lives in the Ozarks told stories of seeing two women dressed in white, their hair long and tangled, moving silently through the fog at dawn. These sightings continued for generations, growing less frequent but never disappearing entirely. As time moved on, the legend spread beyond Missouri, capturing the imagination of ghost hunters, historians, and filmmakers who tried to uncover the truth behind the myth. Yet, every attempt to expose the story seemed to end the same way. with unanswered questions and eerie coincidences that suggested the sisters still had a hand in protecting their secrets. The Wild Sisters of the Ozarks became more than just a cautionary tale. They became an embodiment of the mysterious bond between beauty and evil, desire and doom, forever woven into the mist and shadows of the ancient woods that had once hidden their crimes. What drove the Wild Sisters to such madness? Was it isolation, vengeance, or something far more sinister that lurked in their hearts? Their tale remains buried beneath the mist of the Ozarks, but their legacy continues. A haunting reminder that evil can sometimes wear the most beautiful face. And though decades have passed, the locals still say on quiet nights you can hear faint whispers, the laughter of the sisters who once lured men to their doom.